Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hey guys, welcome to the inaugural Short and to the Point podcast over at Awful Announcing and the Comeback. Jess Kleinschmidt here. I am so happy that you've joined me today. This show is something that I've always wanted to do. I'm lucky to be a member of the media, but I also think oftentimes social media gives us a different type of access, more attainable access, which is wonderful. We want to hear from the actual source of this person, of the piece of content that they're introducing. And we deserve to have certain things kept private to ourselves. But in that case, when we do get a chance to talk to them, it's kind of a 1 in a million type of conversation. I love those types of conversation. And it's a small piece of what I hope to bring to you guys. And like I said, I'm so glad that you joined me. And this week in particular, I believe kind of sets the tone of what I want to do with this show from here on out. And it's my sit down with Jared Carrabis over at DraftKings, and also a story that really tugged at my heartstrings and really just exuded what I want to do with my career on both sides with Giannis and how he spoke to the media. So we're going to start with Giannis Antetokounmpo. Following that overtime loss to the Heat on Wednesday night, Giannis answered a question during his post-game press conference. He was asked, do you believe the Milwaukee Bucks, if their season was a failure? Now, despite a winning record during the regular season, the Bucks, who earned a number 1 seed, actually lost to a number 8 seed because, sports. And they lost the first round series. So take a listen to that interview.
Exact same question, but I'm curious for you. Do you view this season as a failure?
Oh my God. Okay, because I'm not that up. You asked me the same question last year, Eric. Okay. Do you get a promotion every year on your job? No, right? So every year you work is a failure. Yes or no? No. Every year you work towards something, towards a goal, right? Which is to get a promotion, to be able to take care of your family, to be able, provide the house for them or take care of your parents. You work towards a goal. It's not a failure. It's steps to success, And if you've never, I don't want to make it personal. So there's always steps to it, Michael Jordan played 15 years, won 6 championships. The other 9 years was a failure.
So it was really cool to have the curtain pulled back on Giannis. And you can tell he was kind of prepared for that answer. And I know that has a lot to do with the fact that he said the reporter asked him the exact same question the season before. Now, I know these guys and these girls have a public image as athletes. So we are going to get certain, access to them that we may or may not love. They, of course, may or may not love. But they have a unique and lucrative job. I totally understand. But, I cover baseball for a living, and failure is the most important lesson you have to learn, because if you're hitting 1 out of 3 times, you're considered, batting you're one of the better batters in the league because you're batting 300. I think Tony Kemp once told me, he said, we're playing this game of failure at the most professional level. And that's ridiculous, right? You think about failure as my life is over. Things aren't working my way. So when you're coming at an athlete who has certainly failed over amount of times and coming out of that, that's got to be interesting to not only be prepared for that answer, but knowing what's coming up. On the flip side, however, the reporter had a job to do. I can tell you, I've asked many stupid questions before, but the thing about it is those stupid questions oftentimes turn into a really beautiful answer, an insightful answer, just like this one. I'm not saying the question was dumb necessarily. I'm not saying it was stupid, because it's all about how you interpret these questions. I can tell you a lot of people who've never worked in the industry have told me my questions are dumb. And that's fine. I understand. And I'm also not saying Giannis being mean in this scenario is actually true, because it's impossible to turn this man into a mean person. And I know that because I wrote an article for Awful Announcing, and comedian Hassan Minaj tried to make Giannis into a mean person, and it was impossible. But I like that he showed his spirit. He's filled with emotions after a loss. You're always filled with emotions. We know how Giannis acts when he wins the game, but it's also important to see how these guys are after they lose. And it's a loss that was difficult. So as much as we are unsure about how this question was framed, the answer wouldn't have existed if this question wasn't asked. I'm also sticking up for myself because your girl has asked her fair share of stupid questions recently with Shohei Ohtani. We're not going to go there, though. We don't like to live in the past. So it makes you think. We do have my interview with DraftKings, Jared Carrabis, coming up right now. And I think he was important as my first guest, not just because he works in the media. We know that's important. We also know he works in baseball media, which intrigues me because when you launch a podcast, it's difficult. When you launch a baseball podcast, it's extra difficult. You know how many baseball podcasts I've launched? 3. You know how many have been successful? 0. And they're successful to a certain extent. Don't get me wrong. A lot of the times that wasn't my fault. I'm not placing blame on everybody, but people want numbers and sometimes those numbers don't work out. And it just is one of those things. So I picked his brain about that. What makes it successful? And he has this really unique ability to gain trust from players and managers, coaches, broadcasters in order to become a loved media member, but not necessarily in the reporter avenue that we might be used to. And I thought that was really important. And of course, we talked about his transition from Barstool to DraftKings, which was very, very interesting to hear. Take a listen. Okay, welcome back to Short and to the Point. And I promised y'all a really amazing interview, and I'm about to deliver. Jared Carrabis of DraftKings joins me today. He's a co-host with my brother, our brother at this point, Dallas Braden, on the Baseball is Dead podcast. You do Nesson, so much more. My dear friend Jared, how are you today?
It's good to see you again. I feel like it's probably been, I feel like the last time I saw your face was during the pandemic.
Oh gosh, why would you bring that up? They want to talk about PTSD. My gosh, I think, you know what's weird is people talk about that. I think I made more content during the pandemic than I ever will in my entire life.
It just came up on my Facebook memories that it was 3 years ago today when I was putting out the rock paper scissors videos that I was doing because they were yeah, you guys there's no games, but you guys still have to make some interesting sports related content. So I was okay, I know a bunch of players, let me just see if all of them want to play rock paper scissors for a wager. And today was the anniversary of my Andrew Benintendi video. So I was oh, okay, I remember that.
We had to be extremely creative during those times, I've noticed. And everybody launched a podcast and I launched it too. They're in my graveyard right now of failed baseball podcasts. And I feel like baseball podcasts are the most difficult to not only launch, but continue. And I know you have a different podcast now, but it was a bit of a transition. What makes a successful baseball podcast? Because I need to know.
So I feel like in my position, I've found success with it because I've used the model of I'm a Breaking Bad fan and I loved The Walking Dead, and AMC would have those talk shows right after the episode would air. So that's what I try to make the podcast, where so many if you really want baseball, hard-hitting baseball analysis, you're going to put on MLB Network. You're going to listen to actual professionals. I'm a fan. I didn't play, but so that everyone has a little bit of everything, I think I've built the best podcast team in the baseball space. We have Dallas Braden, who's a former player, and he's a current major league broadcaster. We have Justin Havens, who used to be the producer of Baseball Tonight, and he's just a stat guru. And then we have Joey, whose baseball doesn't exist on YouTube, and he's one of my favorite baseball YouTubers. So he's interesting, but he's quirky, he's funny, and he also is really good at finding the in-between story. I lay out the surface level stories, but then he had a story on the last podcast about how Zach Greinke has struck out 20% of the active major league managers. Right. It's I never would have thought to research that or think of that. So we have a very interesting blend where if you want analysis, we have that. But if you want to laugh and be entertained, we have that as well. And we'll catch you up without being yep, yesterday, the Astros beat the Rays and there was a shutout. And like we were talking about the stories in between the stories, and I think that that's what baseball fans enjoy.
When you're describing it, it sounds like you have a puzzle and there's about 5 pieces and you all kind of work together. Not to mention these certain pieces you didn't know you needed, and then you kind of fill in those gaps. So I think that's really cool. And you've been in the industry for a while, and you've shown a lot of these like back in the day clips of the scrawny kid in Boston. But how do you think baseball media has changed since you were that kid?
Ooh, it's changed a lot because I think when I first started, I didn't have aspirations of it being a career the way that I do it now, because back then it was like, if you want to cover baseball, you have to work for a newspaper. Like you have to write for the Boston Herald or the Boston Globe, and you can't be a fan. You have to change your voice. You have to conform to the style that your editor wants you to write in. And that didn't have any appeal to me whatsoever. So that's how I started blogging, because I was like, all right, I may not do this as a career, but like I can at least build an audience, and I'm not like talking to nobody. So I started doing it that way. And then I guess, podcasting wasn't a thing yet. That like I started in 2006, and blogging was just kind of like a new concept, where if you were a blogger, then you were like, oh, in your mom's basement and blah, blah, blah. And like,
Yes.
and I was like, you know what? You're right. I am in my mom's basement right now, but that
I'm
doesn't
leaning into
mean,
it. Like, let's call it spade a spade.
yeah, I was like, that doesn't mean that these blogs aren't good. It just so happens to be that I live in my mom's basement at the same time that I'm writing them. So I think it was like probably like I got hired part-time at Barstool in 2014. And at the time, even then, I was like, yeah, like this is kind of like this is gonna be your life. You just write blogs. And like there was nothing else to do. Like, what else was I gonna do? And then in 2015 is when I launched Section 10. And that was basically because of Pete Blackburn. Like Pete Blackburn was like we had been friends for a while. Like we had met through like a mutual friend in like 2010, and he was just like the savvy guy. Like he built my website in 2014.
Wow.
So he was kind of doing the same thing that I was doing, but for hockey. But he had a love for the Red Sox, so he was like, yeah, we should do a podcast. And eventually we got to like I think he wanted to do like almost like a men's lifestyle podcast. And I was like, well, my audience, it's all Red Sox fans. So like, what if we kind of like blended the two, where it was like a men's lifestyle podcast, but it's like Red Sox centric. And that's kind of like what started the tone of that show, was like, yeah, we're not exactly breaking down the X's and O's. Like we're talking about the Red Sox, but we're doing it in a way where like, guys that are just sitting around talking about baseball would talk about baseball. And so that's just like a huge change from 2006, where it's like, yeah, if you want to cover baseball, you have to wear a button-up shirt, and you have to act like you don't actually care about the results. And that's just not how I've ever really operated.
And I could imagine it was difficult to find that balance, but you mentioned the word podcast. What was hearing the word podcast back then like compared to now? And I feel like even before the pandemic, it was pretty cool to have a podcast, and then everybody started launching them. So what does that word mean to you then and now?
So probably in 2000, I want to say 9 or 10, I started doing webcasts, which is a word that no one uses now. Now it's like live stream or YouTube show or whatever.
We should bring back webcasts, by the way.
We should bring back
great
webcasts.
term. Yeah.
Like that's that's essentially what it is. It's like a live stream if it's live. If it's not, then it's just, it's your podcast in YouTube form. But that's what we were doing back then. So I was kind of podcasting back then. Like that's more or less what it was. Like we would take callers, but I guess it was more radio, because we would have segments. But we would have like guests that would call in. There would be a live chat so we could respond to people that were watching live. But yeah, I think when I first started a podcast, my mind went to like, oh, okay, like this is just this is like practice for radio, or this is a way to just connect with my existing audience in a different way beyond like the written word. um it never occurred to me that podcasting would be the bread and butter. I always thought like I'm a writer, but if you enjoy my blogs, you can also check out my podcast if you like. And then quickly it became like, hey, like, the podcast is the thing. Like that's how you get your message out. That's what you're going to spend your most time on. You're going to be cutting up and repurposing your podcast for video clips on social media. It was just a whole thing. So I would say when I first started podcasting, it did not occur to me that like that was going to be like the main thing someday.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of cool because it enhances your writing. And that's what we used to look at it as. Like you want to be a five-tool player in certain aspects. And people get obsessed with seeing your byline there. They're like, who is this guy? And they want to know more. And then you're there, you're a real person, which is always good. That just helps you. I don't like to use the term brand, but at the end of the day, it helps your brand and who you are as a human being more approachable. Love that about you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're with DraftKings now, but before that, you were with Barstool. And I loved that podcast, not just because I like you mentioned, it had my boy Dallas, but also you even it out with the comedic relief and everything else. But now you're on a different platform. What was that transition like?
It was very rewarding because when you're a Barstool, it kind of gets beaten into your brain that you're just a product of the machine and that without the machine, you're not anything. And I mean, it was a year last month that we launched like Baseball is Dead. And like we're rivaling all the biggest podcasts. It's just us. Like obviously we're paid by DraftKings, but they are just for the first time like launching like a media section of their company. Like there's no mothership that's pushing us to help us get out there. It's just us.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we are still like, I think last week we were the number 2 baseball podcast, like after a year. Because the way that the algorithm works is if you're a brand new podcast, they push you to the moon, you jump up the rankings. Some people game the system in other ways, but it's literally just us. Like it is us versus the world. And it's super rewarding when you kind of like look at it all, your hard work and having those self-doubts, like I feel like there are plenty of self-doubts in that regard where you think, I don't know if I can do this on my own. Are they right that we need them and not the other way around? But it just hasn't been the case.
So that self-doubt is still happening in your career despite, I mean, your resume speaks for itself. That's still occurring to you in your career right now.
Not anymore.
Okay.
I think, when you're making that jump, like I thought I was going to be at Barstool for the rest of my life. It didn't work out that way. But I think, if you're like competitive or you want to be the best in the world at something, you have to take that leap. And I mean, like, yes, admittedly, like it would bother me when people were like, oh, you're Dave's bitch. And like, you'd be nothing without Dave. I'm like, and in my head, I'm thinking like, that's not true, but I can't prove it. How do I prove that? So yeah, like getting the opportunity to kind of like step out on our own here. Like obviously having the backing of DraftKings is great for, I guess, like credibility standpoints. Like, yeah, like a major sports book is down with these guys. But just from kind of getting an audience, like, hey, come on over, check us out. Like that's a hard thing to do on your own, but we're doing it. Like the podcast is, I mean, it's us and John Boy really like at the top.
Yeah. And that's actually, I was going to ask, like, I feel like that's kind of the playing field at the moment. But you said, you thought you were going to work at Barstool for the rest of your life. Would you have been okay with that?
Yes and no. Like I think I was comfortable there. I was happy there. Like there's definitely that dynamic of your coworkers are almost like your second family. You spend so much time together, especially after the move to New York,
Yeah.
because a lot of people were not from New York. We all kind of came there and didn't have anyone else besides each other. So there was that like, hey, like this is like a family type deal. So that part, like I do miss, like I miss the people, but I think I always would have wondered, like, can you do it on your own? Like,
Mhm.
are you a product of the company or are you a product of your hard work? And I think it's a combination of both. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that, I mean, we would be doing what we're doing right now if I wasn't at Barstool first.
Yeah.
I know that Barstool helped me a ton. But there are definitely examples of people who go there and work there and move on and you never hear from them again. And there are examples of people who go there, move on, and they become even bigger stars. I'm not going to sit here and compare myself to Pat McAfee, but I think that we fall into the category of someone that worked there, moved on, and are in a better spot. Like I feel like we are in a better spot now because I mean, I'm not gonna like get into how other people feel about the Barstool brand. They obviously have a ton of diehard fans, but there are a lot of people that hate Barstool.
Mhm.
And that always bothered me where people wouldn't give me a chance because of things that were said or done by other people. I was like, that's not fair. And they'd be like, well, you take a paycheck from that company and you know what the company's all about and blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm like, dude, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's where I work. Like, judge me for what I say and what I do. So that was another thing about kind of moving on was now I have the opportunity to be judged based on like what I do and what I say versus what other people do and what they say. Like I hated that so much.
I feel like there's one less like thing hanging on you. You can just kind of go do it now because you have the DK brand behind you. And I know you're not comparing yourself to Pat McAfee, but the thing about it is you two have one big thing in common, and you have the players' trust. And I think of the clip of you in Dallas talking to Christian Yelich.
Mm-hmm.
And Yelich looked like he was a kid in a candy store. He was brightening up, talking to y'all, saying, oh, you're not members of the media, but you still get info about him and you put it out there. And that means it's within, we can grab it and use it. How do you develop that trust between the players? Because, you're still on Nesson. That's still a reportery type of vibe. You know how reporters are. How do you find that balance between creating content and developing the trust of the players?
It took a long time. It took a long time. Like that was that was one of the things that they haven't replaced me really at Barstool. Like there's no Red Sox guy there. If there was, I need people to know that guy would not be given the same access that I have just because he works for Barstool.
Mm-hmm.
I worked my ass off for that years. Like I have emails from 2010 emailing Sam Kennedy being like, hey, can I have press passes? And Sam was awesome. He was like, I can't do that, but I'll give you tickets to any 10 games that you want. Just pick them out and then we'll leave you the tickets. And I was like, awesome, cool. Like that was like their first time giving me access, was giving me standing room tickets to 10 games in 2010. Mm-hmm. And then Dallas was pretty instrumental in that as well, because in 2018, that's when I went to Oakland for the first time and we had press passes. So I was on the field when.
And you loved it. You loved it.
I loved it. I did love it. I did love it. Sean Manaea threw his no-hitter and I was on the field post game.
Love that.
And it just kind of clicked in my brain. And I went back to the Red Sox and I was like, why will the Oakland A's give me field passes, but you guys won't? I was like, I'm a Red Sox guy. I more or less said, there's not a person in that press box that you give a press pass to that has a bigger Red Sox audience than I do. It's like, let's call a spade here.
Yeah.
And then they were like, all right, well, like let's kind of like sort everything out. I was like, I don't want to go in the press box. I don't want to go in the clubhouse. I don't want to go in the media room. I just want to go to batting practice. Like, let me be in the dugout. Let me be on the field when they take batting practice. Like, I don't want to be in their personal space, but I want to be able to like have these conversations with them when there's not fans around, so stuff like that. So I think I earned over time. It still took time. Even it wasn't like day one, I got the press pass and earned the respect. But Dallas was instrumental in that way. And then Alex Cora. So I had developed a relationship with Alex Cora a little bit through Twitter before he was hired as Red Sox manager, because I used to tweet about like Rusney Castillo, and I was like, this guy sucks. And I think Cora managed him in some winter league. So like we would go back and forth about Rusney Castillo on Twitter, and then we followed each other, and then we DM'd each other, and then he gave me his number. So I had like a contact with him before he got hired. And then when he got hired, it was like, oh, okay. All right, let's go. Like, let's do this. Yeah. So I think part of it was if Cora's boys with him, then why can't I be? Like, I think we can trust him. And then when JD Martinez got signed, so we kind of became buddy during the courting process of his free agency. Like I was making videos and they were putting them on like the Barstool Instagram. And then we would see that he was responding to them in the DMs. So I went from talking about him to talking to him on the camera. So then he ends up signing in Boston. We become friends. And then I met them in person for the first time when I was on the field in Oakland. Yeah. Met JD for the first time in person. Met Alex Cora for the first time. So if you're the best hitter on the team and you're the manager of the team, and those two guys are like, we like this guy, then it slowly became, I had to convince some of the players that were there that had been there that were like, we're iffy about this guy. Guys that were there in 2015 when they were in last place and I had a lot of bad things to say. Now I had to win them over because they were like, I don't know. Like, I know that you guys are cool with him, but I remember him as the guy saying that I suck.
Yeah.
So I think the pivotal one was flipping Joe Kelly. Like Joe Kelly did not like me. And I was like, yeah, you have every reason to not like me. I said some not nice things when you were not good in 2014, 2015. But then like Joe and I now we're like great friends, but I kind of like became more cognizant of that over time, because the one thing I didn't realize was, all right, there's this one player on the team. He's not good. You're picking on him. You don't know, like that guy might be the most popular guy in the clubhouse. Like everyone might love that guy. He might not be good at baseball, but he's the guy that when they have team cookouts, they go to that guy's house. So if you say something bad about him, now you're pissing off 25 other guys. In my case, that was Clay Buchholz. So I was very mean to Clay Buchholz, and he's a very popular guy in the clubhouse. So these are all things I'm learning over time. But yeah, I think, you know, I feel like I protect the players and they know that. Like there's definitely things that will come across my dash that never sees the light of day. I don't stoke the flames of drama. Like most recently, like Jared Duran after a game. Yeah. He got asked about, you know, like what's the biggest difference? And everyone's, oh, he's throwing shade at the clubhouse from last year and blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, he's complimenting the guys in this year's clubhouse. Like you're making it seem like he's talking bad about the guys from last year. So you just kind of like talk through things instead of being like, oh, I don't know. I have it on good authority that he hates JD Martinez. Yeah. So I think guys like appreciate when you have their back, because they can't just take to Twitter and defend themselves. Like they need someone to get the story straight. And more often than not, like I tried to be that guy.
You want to be an extension of them to a certain aspect. And I know a lot of players do that when they go from being a player to going to broadcasting. Like Dallas does a really good job of that, of course. And Michael Morse has done that in the past. So it's a lot of responsibility for you, but I appreciate that.
Yeah. I definitely, I enjoy doing it because it's never not truthful. Like I'm never like making up lies to protect guys. It's always just like, hey, I think, you know, like I saw you had that report the other day. Like that's just simply not true. And then they're like, well, how do you know? I'm like, I know.
Like, come on.
Just trust me on this one.
Yeah, just trust me on this one.
Yeah.
Jared, you've been amazing. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me.
You're the best.
No, you are.
You are. Thanks, Jared, for stopping by. I love him so much. I think it was important to hear his perspective because he's seen different facets of each part of the media. And we kind of got the same start. We were just little bloggers who loved a baseball team. And boom, here we are. I hope you liked this first episode. I know I did. I love learning from people and picking their brain. I want you to learn from them too and kind of understand why I love content so much and why I love talking about everything going on in the sports world, the sports media world. Kind of a junkie. I'm not going to apologize for that. Thank you so much for stopping by. You can read about everything that I've talked about here and everything else going on in the sports world and the sports media world over at Awful Announcing and The Comeback. Thanks to Philip, my producer, for all the hard work that he does and putting up with me. And Short and to the Point will be back with all new episodes, and we'll see you then.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at KleinschmidtJD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.